Okay, Chapter 2 is focusing on the planting of English America, 1500 to 1733. Here we're going to be taking a look at the English's focus on colonizing the New World. Now, first up, before we can talk about anything regarding English colonization in the New World, specifically North America, we have to take a look at the role that the Protestant Reformation had on England itself. Protestant means to protest. Basically, this is a reform movement by Christian people against the Catholic Church, which up until this point had been the only form of Christianity allowed. So Protestant Reformation is to protest. So any denomination that is not Catholic, that considers itself a Christian, is Protestant. Now, the Protestant Reformation came to England in a very strange way. Basically, the king at the time, Henry VIII, changed his religion from the Catholic Church to the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church, in order to break ties with the Vatican and to allow himself to have a divorce from his first wife. Now, this is only important because he really didn't change much else. Everything else about the religion in England at that time stayed pretty much the way it had been under the Catholic Church. The only difference is he is now the head of the church, not the Pope. So with this Protestant Reformation in England, we see an increased rivalry with Spain. Now, Spain and England had always been rivals leading up at this time for economic power, military power, political power, etc. So this change from Catholicism to a Protestant religion only increased that rivalry with Spain, because Spain is a very devout Catholic country at this time. Now, under Henry VIII, it stayed predominantly Catholic, but under his daughter Elizabeth, she really wanted to see some more changes in the Church of England. She also, more than anything, wanted to beat Spain in the power of the world. So using these sea dogs, or basically hired pirates, people like Sir Francis Drake, they were paid to basically plunder Spanish merchant ships in order to acquire a whole lot of wealth for England at this time. This led up until about 1585 1588, when the Spanish Armada, the greatest military fleet, was defeated by England. Up until that point, Spain had been the military powerhouse of the world. This marks a change in that. From 1588 on, England is going to start becoming the leader of the world at this point, their naval superiority. So with an increase in their naval power, an increase in their finances, because they stole it all, well, not all of it, but a lot of it from Spanish ships, they now are starting to look elsewhere. They want more power in the world. They want to colonize to keep up with the other European countries. And they really do have this national identity that we are strong English people. We need to prove how strong we are by getting in on this North American colonization, is the goal for the English. Now, their first attempt at a colony was in Newfoundland. That failed, as did their second attempt at a colony at Roanoke, which is in North Carolina today, by Sir Walter Raleigh. So these two attempts failed miserably, which really didn't help out that national identity cause for the English. However, with a growing population, the English population between 1550 and 1600 went from 3 million to 4 million. Also add to that a depressed economic era where there really aren't a lot of jobs for people to have in England, really created this climate where there is a need to move elsewhere. They need to expand beyond the borders of England in order to not only find work but also have more land, because obviously at this time they are an agrarian society. So they are feeling like they are being pushed out. In come in these joint stock companies. Basically, this is what you think of as a corporation. All these people contribute money to this joint stock. They buy stock in the company, and then they hire these adventurers, or basically people willing to go out into the world to stake a claim to create a colony. So all of these investors in the joint stock companies were investing their money to create a colony. And the goal of the English colonies at this time was not for permanence, but to create money for the investors to have some sort of a return on their investment. One such example of a joint stock company was the Virginia Company of London, founded in 1606, and they were actually granted their charter that same year from the king at the time, James I. Now, this is a joint stock company, so their goal is to make money. So they wanted this economic profit. They'd heard about all of this gold that was being pumped out of Latin and South America, so they figured there was just gold everywhere to be had all over North and South America. So, using the money in their pooled interest, May 24th, 1607, a group of colonists who were hired by the Virginia Company of London founded the first English permanent settlement in the New World of Jamestown on the James River. This is obviously in what is now Virginia. This is the first successful English colony. 100 Englishmen came on shore from the ships coming from England to try to stake a claim in Virginia. Basically, they were looking for gold. The problem is, though, there's not any gold in Virginia, not on the level that they were expecting at the very least. And they were not prepared for the disease that they would encounter, the starvation they would encounter, because they weren't focused on creating a long-lasting settlement. All they were focused on was digging for gold, and they really didn't put the effort into building a settlement or growing crops, so they really were unprepared for the harsh winters that they were going to face. That in 1608, though, Captain John Smith, who we know from the Disney movie Pocahontas, very untrue, took control of the settlement. He established martial law. This is basically military rule. He's in charge because he has the gun. And we all know the story about how Pocahontas saved him from being killed. Now, this is, a little bit of a myth, simply because Pocahontas, and she was the princess of the local king, the local tribe, the Powhatans, who was her father. This was really a ceremony on the part of the Powhatans to try to get the English on their side, to try to align with the Powhatans to become allies with them against rival tribes. Now, Pocahontas is going to play a role later on as well that we will talk about in a minute. Now, the starving time in the winter of 1609 to 1610, this was the worst of the worst. Basically, it's exactly what it is. Most of the colonists died. By this time, 400 men and women had come to Virginia. After that winter was only 60 remained. But that spring, a new governor came to Virginia, Lord de la Warr. And the reason he is important is because he established a very harsh military regime. He had had a lot of practice, I should say, instituting this harsh military regime against the Irish when they had risen up against the English. He's going to use this specifically against the local Native Americans, meaning we are not going to have the same assimilation type lifestyle that we saw with the Spanish. We are going to have very poor Indian relations because the Native Americans have what the English want. They want their land. This is obviously a poster depicting trying to get people to join in to come to Virginia. Very enticing, I guess. This is a map from John Smith of the Native Americans that they encountered when they first got to Virginia. And this is a painting of Pocahontas, the princess of the local tribe, the Powhatans, and she will be important later on as well, beyond just quote-unquote saving John Smith. Now, the Chesapeake region, this is important from a geographical perspective. The Chesapeake region is the area around the Chesapeake Bay. Today, that's Virginia and Maryland. It's very important to know that. The leading tribe in the Chesapeake region was the Powhatan Confederacy. This is a group of tribes that come together for common allies. This is a loose affiliation under their leader, Powhatan. This is obviously Pocahontas' father. Now, at first, he tried to align with them. He tried to create good relationships with the white English. However, that's going to become very difficult later on, especially after Lord de la Warr came in and started using his Irish tactics, as I said before, to burn down villages. So the first Anglo-Powhatan War really erupted over this clash over who was going to control the land. The English wanted it, the Powhatans had it, and so war broke out between the English and the Powhatans. And even after peace was concluded, it really was a strange peace, particularly since the English continued to want to control this land. Now, this first Anglo-Powhatan War was concluded with the marriage of Pocahontas, the daughter of the king, to a local Englishman, John Rolfe, and he's going to also be important. However, even with that truce, it really wasn't very long lasting, and eventually the Virginia Company of London ordered that there be perpetual war without peace or truce against the Powhatans. And this is really telling of how the English are going to interact with the Native Americans in the New World. Now, the Second Anglo-Powhatan War started around 1644, very similar to the first one. The focus is on who owns the land, who has the land. And what we know with this ending of the Second Anglo-Powhatan War, there's not going to be assimilation. There's not really going to be a truce between the English and the Native Americans. There's no real hope for coexistence. The English are taking a very different stance on how they interact with the Native Americans. They want to control the land, and they want the Native Americans gone. And so the English, and this is from an historian's perspective, were really focused on disease, disorganization, and disposability. It was easy once again to conquer these local tribes because of the prevalence of disease. Smallpox, measles, these were running rampant through the Native American tribes of North America like we'd seen before. 90% death rate, just like we saw down in Latin and South America. Also, these local tribes were very disorganized. They weren't really a unified force against the white invaders. Had they come together and tried to push the English out, they probably could have been successful. But there was too much infighting amongst the Native Americans at this time. And finally, the whites saw them as disposable. They were unnecessary. They weren't looking to Christianize or assimilate. They were looking to get rid of them so they could control this territory. Now, just like we've seen elsewhere, the shock of the European arrival creates massive cultural changes, massive demographic changes, not only to the Native Americans, but to the Europeans as well. Like I've said before, the introduction of horses changes Native American tribes. Many of them go from farming agricultural societies to nomadic hunters. That wouldn't have been possible without the introduction of horses. Also, the introduction of firearms is going to change Native American tribes because now they have a weapon that they can use against each other and also against the whites as well. Epidemics, smallpox, measles, are going to kill Native Americans in droves. 90%. They don't have the antibodies to withstand these new diseases coming from Europe because they haven't encountered them in 10,000 years. And also, not only that, not only do we see disorganization amongst the Native Americans, but there's a lot of competition amongst the different tribes to conform to the European way of business because they want the products that the Europeans have. They're not working together in the face of the white invader because they're trying to be their trading partner. Now, the only real difference here is these inland tribes, ones where there weren't a lot of white people. As whites started filtering more and more inland into the Ohio country, around the Great Lakes, etc., there weren't as many whites there, so they didn't have as much power as we saw on the coast. So in these areas, actually, the inland tribes actually forced the whites to assimilate to their way. That is until more whites infiltrated and started taking over those areas as well. Now, you can't talk about Virginia without talking about tobacco, and we will get to that in part 2.